Today's hearing, the Parliament of South Australia's Joint Committee on the Establishment of Adelaide University. My name's Dan Cregan, I'm the presiding member. To my right, Reggie Martin, a member of the Upper House, Lucy Hood, member for Adelaide, Sarah Andrews, member for Gibson, executive officers of the committee, and closest to you, Ms. Honourable Connie Benares, member of the Upper House, joined by Honourable Rob Sims. Honourable Rob Sims, of course, is also a member of the Upper House. In fact, there's a good section there of Upper House members. Honourable Sarah Gay, Honourable Jing Lee, and of course also Honourable John Gardner, member for Moray Alta. Professor, do you have an opening statement that you would wish to give?
I do.
Very well, please proceed.
Firstly, thank you for inviting me here today to give evidence. It's already been said that the University of Adelaide's research ranking comes from around the top 200 performing staff. A substantial risk we face is a major exodus of these staff, causing our ranking to plummet and creating a reputational damage to the state and the university. As I belong to this cohort of researchers, I can provide some perspective on this. The University of Adelaide is in a precarious situation in that staff have not been allowed in-depth consultation, open debate, nor have we been brought along in this process. So far, we've heard many speak at this inquiry who are at an executive level, who are quite removed from the coalface. So I will attempt to be a voice for a majority of staff who are performing in both research and teaching. The merger as proposed is bold and brave. I totally support its intended aims and any change for the better. However, there are risks that have not been articulated and alternatives that could achieve better outcomes that have not been analysed. To bring clarity to this debate, note there are different types of universities throughout the world with different missions. Not all universities are the same. Broadly speaking, the two types of university in consideration today are: one, a traditional university with more advanced degrees taught by world-class researchers. Two, a newer university that tends to deliver applied degrees, sometimes called vocational degrees, with more flexible entry requirements. A traditional university tends to focus on the big research questions that may lead to major breakthroughs, and the more applied or technical university tends to focus on shorter to medium-term research. I'm talking very generally here, and there is, of course, always some overlap in practice. However, industry thrives on both types of universities. We need both. More later on this. First, a quick note about my background. I originally graduated from a University of Technology with a very similar ethos and history to UniSA, so I'm from this background. It propelled me into industry, where I worked for the General Electric Company in London in the UK. Then I worked for a microelectronics startup called Oztech Microsystems at the Levels, now called Mawson Lakes in South Australia. Oztech was a visionary company with 50 engineers designing microchips at a world-class level. But we went into liquidation, and the likes of Intel dominated the market at the time. On the surface, it might seem that was a big failure, but it was a huge success, as it was a breeding ground for 50 engineers who went off to create more startups that were successful and become industry leaders all around Australia. I was the black sheep who didn't do that. I went to the University of Adelaide and went and did a PhD. And I worked my way to professor, and in the last 20 years, I have graduated over 50 PhD students. Of those 50, 7 have created startup companies, and others are industry leaders that have been critical to billions of dollars of business into this state. And that's not to mention the 5,000 undergraduate students I've taught who are key players in our workforce all over South Australia, Australia, and overseas. Now, that's just my story in one tiny field of engineering. Now think of all the engineering researchers at Uni Adelaide. Think of the biotech scientists, the medics, agricultural scientists, physicists, chemical scientists, those in the professions and the arts. Our total impact on the workforce in both South Australia and Australia is unfathomable. The point I'm making is that both past companies and current universities contribute to our economy in ways that cannot be directly measured. There is indeed a brain drain of graduates moving to other states from here, but this demonstrates our universities in South Australia are amply playing their roles in producing highly employable young people. Yes, we could produce more, but if we look at New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland alone, their state governments invest billions of dollars into attracting businesses into their states. But South Australia invests little to none by comparison. A merged university is a distraction that does not fix this core issue. The next question is the much touted one about ranking that we've heard a lot about. Let's have a complete reality check here. Look, there are 25,000 universities in the world. They can't all be in the top 100. Different economies come and go, changing the composition of the top 100. It's nice to be in the top 100 if one is in there, but in the long term, one can't keep chasing these unicorns. To be close to the top 200 is exceptional, as it places a university in the top 1%. Note that ranking doesn't always equate to economy. Take Japan, it has a much larger economy and population, yet it only has 2 universities in the top 100, while Australia has 6. This is on the toughest ranking scale. Harvard is consistently number 1, and we've heard it said that it has an enormous endowment. True. However, we will not beat Harvard in our lifetimes, and that is not even the aim of the merger in the first place. The fact is the United States has over 150 universities with endowments over $2 billion in Australian dollars. The University of Adelaide is actually more highly ranked than 100 of those big endowment universities. We are ranked higher than hundreds of universities around the world with huge, larger endowments. The merger appears to be fixing a problem we don't have. We are doing well, punching well above our weight, and ought to be seen as delivering good value for money. We are arguably the top university in the world for ranking per dollar input. The top performing universities in the United States and the UK, for example, never change their brand and never merge. To not follow that example would be unwise. Manchester is one of the very rare exceptions. More about that later. Let me now turn to the point that Uni SA and Uni Adelaide are quite different universities. When you look at other developed countries, you'll see a mix of traditional universities like Uni Adelaide and newer universities of technology like Uni SA. Both types serve their economies. We need both. For example, if you look at every major German city, you'll see there's a traditional university deep in research doing advanced degrees, and there's a shiny new technical university that they call a University of Applied Sciences, delivering more applied and vocational degrees. Both types of universities, side by side, are required to meet the needs of their industry in Germany. One's delivering applied degrees like Uni SA, and one's delivering the advanced ones more like Uni Adelaide. These universities are distinctive and are never merged. Why? Here's an example. A few years ago here at the University of Adelaide, we actually tried it. We actually tried delivering side by side 2 degrees, our traditional Bachelor of Engineering, which is pretty advanced, and a new Bachelor of Technology, which was more vocational and applied and had more relaxed entry requirements. Guess what happened? It was a big flop. No students enrolled for the Bachelor of Technology. Why should they? If they have the prerequisites to get into our Bachelor of Engineering, they do so. If they don't, they go to a technical university where they can get a degree called a Bachelor of Engineering. If we turn to the example of Manchester, it was a university of heritage like University of Adelaide, whereas Manchester Metropolitan University is a large technical university of similar size and history to UniSA. And guess what? Those two universities didn't merge. It wasn't those two. Manchester instead merged with UMIST, which was closer to being their equivalent of Flinders. UMIST was closer to Manchester as it was a much more research-intense university and much higher up the ranking than Manchester Metropolitan University. Manchester merged with its Flinders, not its UniSA. Moreover, it was hardly a merger because UMIST was tiny. Manchester only had to absorb an extra 6,000 students. UniSA, on the other hand, is next level. It's 30,000 students. So very quickly, let's quickly articulate some risks we're faced with. Risk one, the Adelaide merger study was done without transparency. Staff were not brought along. The NTEU survey showed 25% in favour of the merger. The fact is that on the ground, those 25% are largely lukewarm. One sees no enthusiasm. The elephant in the room is this: how can one possibly execute a merger as large and as complex as this if staff have not been engaged to a level where they have buy-in and ownership of the process? This alone is enough for the project to fail and be an enormous embarrassment for the state. This is not a merger of two car factories. Universities are complex human ecosystems where the capital are the humans. Risk two, university and UniSA are not well matched. There are different types of universities that serve the state differently, as I've described. To merge the two into a one-size-fits-all uni and yet operate at a GO8 level will attract fewer students into the state as compared with operating them separately. Why? Because, as explained earlier, a two-tier degree system doesn't work. We tried it and it was a flop. When students are free to go elsewhere, that's what happens. To maintain the standard of a GO8, one will be focused on attracting the type of students who will cope with the GO8. The spillover may well be captured by Flinders, but once they reach capacity, the rest will go into state. Thus, the state of South Australia loses net students under a merger. A merger of universities with such disparate rankings is unprecedented and leads to enormous issues that have not even been addressed yet. What of the differences in track records between staff of the two universities? There's a significant difference. The criteria for hiring and promotions at University of Adelaide is much more demanding than at UniSA. How can these two workforces come together without obvious inequities? If the expectations of a GO8 staff track record is now imposed on a UniSA staff member, it means that ultimately many of their jobs are on the line if the criteria aren't met. On the other hand, if expectations are relaxed to accommodate, then a merged university is not operating at the level that furthers its stated GO8 ambition. Either way, something is not adding up here. Risk three, an exodus is inevitable. In a merger as large and as complex as this, resources and time get diverted from core business activities. The top 200 staff who are research intensive are those that can be employed in any university in the world with ease. As soon as merger activities slow down their research progress, they will be a flight risk. Risk 4, staff layoffs and cost overruns are inevitable. In year 4 of the Manchester merger, it became clear that the goals of the merger were off target. The university went £3 million into deficit and laid off 400 staff. Then in year 5 of the merger, £1 billion was injected to ensure its success. And this was a tiny merger where there were only 6,000 students. By contrast, Uni SA is over 30,000. And so the capacity for cost overrun is much bigger. Risk 5, the merger is unprecedented. The Premier himself has correctly stated that no merger of this type and size has been done before. But this should cause us immediate concern, surely. Add to that the large difference in ranking between the two universities, their different ethos, different cultures. What is concerning is that no one knows how to even do a merger like that. Our management has zero experience with that. Even consultants have no experience with that. Consultants barely understand what makes a university tick in the first place. This is compounded with the other risk factors that drive high levels of uncertainty. The chance of failure will put our state and our universities at risk of reputational damage. Risk 6, irreversibility. Once the egg has been scrambled, you can't put it back in the shell. Therefore, if the merger were to go ahead, it would need more realistic costing and much larger funding to ensure success. Risk 7, the project is highly undercosted. To put things into context, consider the cost of the Manchester merger that was a lot smaller. Also, the two campuses were closer together. For the Adelaide merger, the cost of change management alone could easily spend the Premier's main contribution. Then there's the Premier's 30 million per annum yielded from a perpetual fund. To put this into context, this 30 million doesn't even pay for what the two unis currently spend on consultants each year. Then on top of this, one has to pay the cost of merging the two university IT systems that can easily run into hundreds of millions if done properly. Then there's the process of shifting, consolidation, remodeling spaces, moving labs. You have twice the number of students in the because of the two universities, and you have twice the number of buildings, but the interior spaces don't magically double, and the lab spaces. So this could easily blow out to 3 billion and likely more. This, of course, can be paid for by further land sales and further sell-off of buildings. But this is short-sighted when after 10 years, the demographics change and the population of South Australia grows. We're going to want those buildings back. As a state, we have a better foundation for the future in keeping those buildings intact and building upon the diversity that our two separate universities offer. Risk 8, the merger business case relies on a further 6,000 international students. What if they don't come? The risk is heightened when you consider the cost of living, housing and rent in Adelaide is sharply rising, while China is undergoing a property market crash right now and its economy is tanking. This change in economic outlook, together with geopolitical tension, means that reliance on extra international students is completely fraught. Also, India just landed on the moon, and all the leaders in that Indian space program had degrees from top Indian universities, not overseas ones. India now has its own capability and role models to look up to that are leaving us behind. These factors, together with other Australian states vying for the same overseas students, means the target of 6,000 extra students is highly uncertain. Risk 9, the merger increases systemic problems. Currently, many large universities throughout Australia are under fire for a range of issues: increasing corporatization, overuse of consultants, poor governance, poor transparency, top-heavy management on inflated salaries, wage theft, over-casualization of staff. These are the real issues that need fixing. A merger is a distraction and will worsen these problems. A merger will embed us more deeply with expensive consultants. After the merger of Manchester, all management there received generous salary increases. A merger will increase the rift between management and staff. What a merger actually does is increase the sustainability of an expensive, top-heavy management embedded into an ecosystem of consultants. And we all know what they're doing to the federal government at the moment. The fact that the smaller university, such as Flinders, has not bought into the merger speaks volumes in terms of sustainability without a management behemoth. Likewise, smaller universities in Western Australia are now thwarting the desire to merge. They are projecting to do fine without it and are suggesting other forms of cooperation are more effective than a merger. As evidence, I have tabled reports on this by UWA, Curtin, Murdoch, and ECU. I quote from the ECU report, that's Edith Cowan University, that a merger will lead to, quote, potential for economic and reputational damage, unquote. The UWA report states a merger would not, quote, clearly provide a competitive advantage in research capacity that could not be achieved through other models such as research joint ventures, unquote. Curtin lists a long list of negative impacts, including, quote, negative impact on staff morale and retention, and undoubtedly lead to redundancy without clear evidence of financial gain, unquote. Murdoch states, quote, we are not aware of any evidence that structural change involving mergers, unquote, will improve performance and sustainability. Risk 10, our ranking will plummet. An exodus, together with the fact that major organizational change always causes a ranking drop, could easily cause an initial drop by 200 places. Evidence of this is that the University of Adelaide right now has been undergoing internal mergers of faculties and schools over the last 3 years. I don't know if you realize that. And what this does is diverts time and money from core business. And as reported in the press, the students consequently raised a vote of no confidence in the management. It has just been announced that consequently we have dropped 25 places in the ARUW ranking. Whilst, guess what? Flinders rose 46 places. And this is the highest rise in the whole country. So Flinders is the uni to watch right now. Risk 11, the government has not read the business case and has not had it independently evaluated. This is an extraordinary oversight, and the lack of independent review raises a big red flag. Federal and state governments review commercial in confidence proposals every day. I sit on various governmental and professional panels myself and review confidential commercial in confidence documents all the time. I see no reason why staff have not been invited to review the business case. Those that come forward can sign a non-disclosure agreement as is best practice. Governments always set up independent panels to review commercial in confidence grant proposals and business cases as they should when public money is spent. There has been a failure of process. And if an independent commission had been set up as promised, I doubt we would be sitting here today. Risk 12, difference in university cultures leads to compromise. If one were merging universities with a similar ranking and staff profiles, one might expect a good alignment. But Uni SA and Uni Adelaide are not aligned, as explained earlier. Their missions and ethos are different. On the ARUW ranking, University of Adelaide is at 157. Uni SA is ranked at 529, highlighting that their staff profiles will be quite different. This means that when two quite different management teams sit down together to negotiate details of the merged university, they will be at loggerheads. Decisions reached will be compromises rather than meeting the intended aims of the merger. Risk 13, The new University Act for the merged university is being rushed. Many observers and staff have been calling for improved governance and an overhaul of the University Act. It would be a huge mistake for this to be a rush job that is not co-created in full consultation with staff. We need at least a year to critically review the Act with robust debate that includes staff and the oversight of an independent panel or commission. Whether or not the merger proceeds, the Act needs careful overhaul. It is our chance to get this right for our state, for our future, maintaining the principles of transparency and academic freedom. Risk 14, alternatives have not been analysed. A good feasibility study not only looks at the target merger, but also benchmarks it against other viable alternatives. The fact that this has not been done is extraordinary. It means there is nothing to gauge it in terms of cost benefit. Could there be lower cost alternatives without the enormous opportunity cost of an unprecedented merger? Due to all the previous risks I've mentioned added together, there is a high chance such a large structural change will outweigh the benefits. We need a further year to properly analyse this. Risk 15, not following best practices. Manchester's description of its merger, tabled as evidence in the first online item I'll refer you to, on page 211, cites critical factors to Manchester's success. I quote, universities similar in research standing, internal support of staff and students, contiguous campuses, both vice-chancellors retiring. The proposed Adelaide merger ticks none of these boxes, and thus we are in grave risk. Moreover, at Manchester, both chancellors stepped down and all management staff down to deans and heads were completely were competitively reselected. Risk 16, and it's my last risk now. It's well known that around 80% of mergers fail, and the reason is people aren't boxes. There are many well-known massive corporate merger debacles that we've all heard about. Sears and Kmart, Lucent and Alcatel, CNN, Viacom, Chrysler and Benz, AOL and Time Warner, etc. In all cases, these resulted in the loss of billions of dollars. Given our uni merger is unprecedented, what is it that emboldens South Australia to think it can execute this flawlessly based on a rushed-through 6-month study? In conclusion, due to all the risks I've outlined, I suggest the following 2 action items. A, should Parliament vote no to the merger, an independent commission or panel still be set up anyway to investigate the need of an overhaul of governance and the University Act, and to investigate a useful off-ramping into merger alternatives that are actually suggested in the tabled Western Australian documents. There's some good ideas to have a look in there. B, should Parliament vote yes to the merger, an independent commission or panel still needs to be set up to investigate the needed overhaul of governance and the University Act to thoroughly investigate the above risks.
Professor,
to allow time for this, I'm
Professor,
just finishing.
We're coming up on 40 minutes. How long do you think you need to conclude?
I'm finishing.
Very
To
well.
allow time for this, it's critical that it be moved, the merger be delayed for 1 year. To not do so would result in reputational damage to our universities and our state. Thank you.
We're keen to turn to questions, Professor. Honourable Reggie Martin.
Thank you, Professor, for your evidence today. You mentioned in the costings, you used the word likely when more than $3 billion. Can you please provide how you came to that figure? Because we've been provided with evidence that's very, very different to that. So are you able to provide to this committee how you think it's likely to be more than $3 billion? That can be provided on notice, doesn't need to be now.
Yeah,
So,
I can provide that on notice, but just broadly speaking, I mentioned there would be, remodelling of spaces, because you now have twice as many, although you have twice as many buildings.
No, I understand, but we've been provided with information
that's very
been
expensive
taken
to
into
do
account.
that
So I
sort of
guess
stuff.
I'd like to understand how your
Yeah.
costings are different to what's been provided by the universities in
Sure.
their transition plan.
Sure.
So it's a very different.
And very broadly, one only has to look at the cost of the Manchester merger for a much smaller scenario. And you can see that a very low costing doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, if you could provide that would be very good. I think you also said that the top, you're talking about the United States universities, and you were saying the top universities don't merge. I just had a quick Google. Boston University's gone through a merger. They're ranked 71 in the world. Brown University ranked 61. They've gone through mergers. And my understanding is the University of California, one of the best institutions in the world, and also very well known for bringing in a lot of students, first in family, low economic status. They've gone through a merger, and some of the universities are top 25.
Sure, you have to be careful with that. There are different merger models and different ways of doing things. So the type of merger we're talking about here in Adelaide is actually sticking the two universities physically together. Whereas say, for example, the California model is what's called a federated model, where they're basically more or less operating independently as separate campuses. These are things that should be really benchmarked and fully analysed with our particular merger model that is being proposed here. This is one of my points I was making.
One of the benefits of these committee hearings is we've got to hear from a lot of different people with a lot of different opinions and views. We've heard from Professor Harvey from UniSA and Professor Sweeney from the University of Adelaide, who spoke very passionately about the benefits of this and how they're looking forward to working with colleagues across both universities and the enormous opportunities. I think Professor Sweeney's just moved here from Harvard, and he sees this merger as an enormous opportunity to attract more people and to create a new way of doing things. So I guess, can you appreciate that your view isn't necessarily universal and that there are a variety of opinions amongst different professors at both institutions?
Yes, that's right. And as I said, there are a lot of major differences between the two universities, but there are also some overlapping areas. And so the cancer centres could be one example of an overlapping area. But you don't do a whole merger just because a few centres here and there happen to have some good overlap. What you might consider doing is not merging and consider more cooperation between those centres, or even merging those centres. Of course, if you merge those centres independently of the two universities, you get then the problem of which university decides is going to own the new merged centre. So what you'd have to do is do some horse trading, where one university agrees, okay, we'll have this centre, and the other one agrees on another, or something like that. But these are things that have to be fully analysed, and this is why I'm saying we need another year to look at this properly.
Thank you.
Oh, Rob Sims.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much, Professor, for your presentation to this committee. One of the issues that's come to light during the hearings this week was some evidence from Treasury that if in the event that the universities are not able to secure a loan to assist them with this merger, that the state government would be willing to contribute and provide them a loan. And I noted with interest the points that you made about potential blowouts of costs. Is that something that concerns you in terms of potential risks of this new merger?
Getting a loan from the government, you mean?
Well, the impact for the taxpayer in terms of potential liability if a loan could not be secured commercially by the universities.
I think that's an obvious concern, yes.
We also had evidence yesterday from Chris Schott, who I think has an association previously with the University of Adelaide, had been on the university's council. He's obviously a proponent of the merger, but he did recognise that there was some significant risk that there might be a reduction in rankings for the university. I think you've made the same point. In his evidence, though, to this committee, Mr. Schott said that he didn't think that would have any impact on the university because the rankings wasn't an issue that would necessarily matter to international students. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but something along those lines. Do you accept that analysis?
Yes and no. It depends how badly the ranking drops. If it drops a few places, it doesn't make much difference. But if it drops like 200 or 300, that would be huge, and people will be going, what's happening here? Do we want to go here? So my prediction is it will drop a lot for reasons I discussed already.
And so a drop of several hundred places, for instance, you think that would have a big impact in terms of being able to recruit new students?
It might make them think, what's happening here. Yes, it will give them a double think.
You talked a bit in your presentation about staff consultation. Can I ask, when did you learn that the decision had been reached for a merger?
I guess when the council met, and if you remember, it was all advertised in the Advertiser over the weekend. That's when we will find out.
So you read about it in the paper?
Well, I have contacts, so I knew already. But yes, that was when I was supposed to know. Yes.
So you might have heard informally, but you didn't receive any formal notification other than a newspaper article published.
I think that weekend there was also an official university email, probably at the same time as the newspapers. Yeah.
How did it make you feel to hear from your employer this intention via a newspaper article?
It seemed a bit contrived doing it over the weekend, but it's fine.
One of the issues you flagged was the need to look at governance. Is one of the things that you're interested in potential reimbursements for Vice-Chancellors? We heard evidence yesterday again from Mr. Schott that the state government should talk to any new university about putting a cap on Vice-Chancellors' salaries. Is that something, for instance, that you would be supportive of?
Absolutely, yes. I think the problem with the ever-increasing salaries, it just gets out of hand, and it just filters down into having a huge top-heavy management.
The Premier, Deputy Premier rather, Dr. Susan Close, yesterday on radio stated that there would be no forced redundancies in the initial period after the merger. Do you accept those assurances, and are you able to elaborate a little bit more around your concerns in terms of potential job losses?
Yes, I don't accept the assurances. One can assure things in good faith. However, when push comes to shove, like what happened in Manchester, found themselves £30 million in debt, you will say, oops, I'm sorry, despite my assurances, look, we're in debt, sorry, we have to do it. And we have to lay off another 400 or whatever. So that's what will happen in practice.
And just one of the final question, one of the other points you raised was around, I think you mentioned after the merger took place in Manchester that the senior executives were given bonus payments. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how that worked?
Oh, I don't think it was a bonus payment. I think they just all had salary increases.
Okay, and that was just the senior executives?
Yeah. Not the staff.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Honourable Connie Benares.
Thank you. Chair, just following up on some of those questions, you've said, and I'm paraphrasing, Professor,
Sure.
that staff haven't been brought along on the journey, that your evidence today is reflective of the majority of academics, and that 25% of those in favour is move forward with this. And my questions are, and I understand, and this is what I'm hoping you'll be able to clarify, there was a vision statement that was sent to about 2,085 staff members, and that received about 400 staff responses. Are you aware of that?
The vision statement, I wasn't aware of the response count, but I received the vision statement.
And did you respond to the vision statement?
I can't remember now, to be honest.
Okay. When you refer to something might have been sent to by the universities, is it that vision statement or is it something else? Just in terms of the finding out via the newspaper.
I think, once the council had made their decision and that it was going ahead, we got an official email from the Chancellor
Outlining what was going to happen and what the proposal was.
Outlining that it was happening, that I think the vision statement occurred before then.
Yeah,
yes.
and then post those things, there was the newspaper articles regarding those releases.
Sure.
So in fact, while some staff may have seen it for the first time in the newspaper, that wasn't the first time it was communicated with staff or academics at the university, because there'd been this process before.
Maybe I misunderstood the question before. I understood the question before as being, when did I realise it had happened and had been done? And that was the newspaper. But the actual vision, the vision of what the university might look like was articulated before. Yes.
Beforehand. Thank you. The Vice-Chancellors, as I understand it, held staff sessions. There were about 2,000 staff who attended those. Did you and your academic colleagues attend those? And I guess what I'm trying to also articulate is, when you say you speak for the majority of academics, were there a majority of those academics at those staff sessions? There's over 2,000 people who attended, as I understand it. Did you attend them? How do we quantify you speaking for the majority of those academics?
That's a good question. I did attend meetings, and basically, I'm pretty well connected around the university, and I talk to a lot of people, and I'm just not seeing any enthusiasm anyway.
But there's 25% who have written in favour.
Yeah.
There's over 400 responses to the vision statement. And there's 2,000 people who have attended those sessions where they have been briefed about what's being proposed. So I guess I'm trying to... Is this anecdotally through conversations you've just had with your colleagues when you say that your view is shared by the majority of academics?
I was saying I think my wording was a majority of research-intense academics, the kind of top 200 ones. But basically, I'm giving you a kind of a litmus feeling of the mood that I'm sensing on campus. Yeah.
Notwithstanding the fact that there have been those sessions where 2,000 people have attended and they've had the benefit of hearing. I'm playing devil's advocate, Professor. Sure.
And they did ask critical questions at the end of those sessions. What was very disappointing about those sessions is there was very short question time. We were just cut off very quickly, so we never got a chance to get into some good heated debate. It was very perfunctory.
Has there been opportunity to go back either on an individual basis or any other basis for further?
Not really. The only opportunity they've given us is a kind of an online thing where you can just pop in the questions, and staff just roll their eyes at that because you just get a form answer back, and we're fed up with that sort of thing. We want some real eye-to-eye contact and real debate.
We can't suggest that hasn't been offered in terms of the notifications that were made pre-newspaper articles, and also the ongoing sessions that were held by the Vice-Chancellors to provide, albeit you might think there wasn't the opportunity for debate. But
they basically were very controlled sessions, very limited question time, and we just didn't feel we had a voice.
Thank you.
Honourable Sarah Game.
Thank you. I just had a few questions. I think you did pretty much answer one of them already, but it seems to me, from what I understand so far, that with the budgeting, there's no costing for infrastructure at all. Would you say that that's unrealistic to merge the two unis without an infrastructure cost?
Are you saying there was no infrastructure cost that you saw?
That's my understanding, is that upfront cost of 500 to 650 million, my understanding is that there is no infrastructure cost. That there's no money being set aside for infrastructure. That's my understanding to this point, unless someone can
Yeah,
correct me.
well, my understanding is all very murky what the finances are, so it's hard to say. But if that's your understanding, I would say if that's true, then I would be concerned that those costs haven't been put in. Yeah.
We heard from the chair of the Productivity Commission yesterday, and he did make quite a convincing argument to me anyway, that universities do need significant reform, that other innovative policies haven't been working, and that it's time to look at universities and how they can be more entrepreneurial to help, I guess, drive economic growth and wages. Would you agree that we do need to be looking at significant university reform for that purpose?
You know, all these suggestions and reforms, and even in my piece, I suggested some reforms in terms of governance and things, you know, and being more entrepreneurial. These are all good things, but you don't need a merger to do that. You can still make those reforms.
You talked a couple of times about the risk of losing our best and most talented people. I guess it's also been argued to me, and I just remain open-minded trying to get to the bottom of things, but it's also been put that, you know, this is an opportunity to create a new university. There'll be ultimately more money available to stream towards the academic purpose rather than the administrative purpose, and that this is in fact a way to attract to this state and hopefully retain our best and most talented people. Can you just help me understand why you don't think you're talking more about we're going to risk losing our best and most talented people? Why do you think they wouldn't want to buy into that vision? It's going to be more money for the academic purpose. It's going to be a bigger university. It's a new university. It's an opportunity to be more entrepreneurial. A number of people have made the argument this is our best opportunity to attract the best and retain the best.
As I mentioned, in the past 3 years, we've had internal mergers. We've merged departments and faculties, and so we've experienced 3 years of merging internally, and that diverts money and time and slows down our research. And research-intense people, you know, want to stay focused on their research. And something as huge and as complex as this merger, that's unprecedented, will divert time, much more time and money than what we've just experienced. We've seen a 25-point drop because of that just now, and therefore a merger is going to make it drop much more. And what will happen is some of the top players, especially those who've maybe come in from interstate or overseas, who are not necessarily attached to Adelaide as a city, but who've been bought in, you know, if there's all this organizational chaos going around them and their lab is being moved or whatever, they'll just pack it in and say, well, I'll just go and work for somewhere else. So this is the danger.
Thank you.
Can I ask a supplementary off the back of that, Chair? Thank you. Just off the back of the Honourable Ms Game's question, you said that we don't need a merger. The Productivity Commission paints a bleak picture if we sit and do nothing with or without a merger. Now, that has been an independent assessment process. So what do you say to that?
Oh, well, if you, as I said in my closing statement, I believe we should, if we vote no to the merger, we still need a commission to look at governance, the University Act, and a way of off-ramping into merger alternatives. And there's
all three universities?
Flinders is doing fantastic at the moment. I'm not sure if they want to be tampered with, but yes, at least these two universities, and if Flinders wants to be involved, we should be looking at, say, so I've tabled the 4 documents from the 4 Western Australian universities, and there's lots of suggestions in there of all alternative things you could be doing.
I think the words of, and this is my final supplementary, Chair, the words of the Productivity Commission were that the ethos of the bill that is currently before Parliament should, as a bare minimum, be adopted across all three universities if there is not to be a merger. That's their evidence to this committee.
To become more entrepreneurial.
Well, the objectives and principles set out in the draft bill, that ethos would need to be adopted across all three universities consistently if we are to move forward. In the absence of that, nothing's going to change.
Yeah, I think I kind of addressed this in the beginning of my piece, where I expressed how, you know, my own graduated students have created startup companies and have been instrumental to business in South Australia and throughout Australia, and that it's not just me, it's all the other staff. So I think there is a misconception, and I think we are being very entrepreneurial and we are stimulating. However, you can't put the cart before the horse. I also said that South Australia invests little to none compared to Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales in terms of attracting industry to the state. And so I think you need both. You can't just blame the universities and point the universities for not being entrepreneurial. There needs to be a stimulation of business into the state as well. It's not a university's job to create an economy. We can help the economy and we can stimulate it, but we are educational institutions. We're not a machine you're going to pump industries out of. That's not our mission.
Sure. But
Chair,
Professor,
I wrote
Member
about
for
8 or 9
Morales.
questions, and I'm conscious we have an in-camera
Yes.
session starting soon, so I propose to shrink my set to 2 or 3.
Very well.
I
There's
know
also some other members seeking the call. So, Member for Morales, I'm going to turn to you first.
Thank you.
Maybe we then try
The-
and bring things to a close within about 10 minutes.
Professor Abbott, you started with reflecting on what I think in the first week of our testimony we had a lot of people talking about what constructs rankings being seen as desirable for the status of reputation, but really most importantly for what it means for our opportunities with international students. So let's assume that rankings are a positive, better rankings are good, and let's assume also that everyone understands international students are good and that research has value. The impact in your early statement was that of the 200 top staff, the output of whom is the most significant factor in most of the rankings and the entire factor in the research-based ranking, that your contention was that a lot of them would leave in that transition phase. I think the Vice Chancellor's admitted that there would be a dip in rankings. Your suggestion is that it would be a significant one. So I guess what I want to get to the bottom of is of those 200 researchers, I don't know particularly who they are. I don't know if they're well understood within the university. Who would be those people? Presumably it's in terms of output of research papers and critical evaluations. But can you explain how many of those do you think would be at risk of leaving, and what is your measure of confidence in that assertion? I'm happy to assume that you speak on behalf of many staff, but what is your measure of the confidence when you say there's going to be a substantial dip?
Well, I'm pretty confident. We've already seen some leave already, and I think once you start getting into the actual nuts and bolts of the merger, and units are being moved around and consolidated and labs moved, it's going to be there's going to be some chaos, and I think you'll find a lot of researchers getting extremely frustrated. I can see that happening.
In terms of the transition period, I think one or two of the proponents have suggested that dip in rankings might be for a year or two and then it will go up again. What's your estimate of what the risk period would be before new investments bringing in new researchers might see it improve?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. It's hard to know those sort of things. All I can say is that this is an unprecedented merger. We've never had a merger of universities with such two disparate rankings. And because of those disparate rankings also comes with it disparate cultures and disparate missions of what they do. And so by mixing those two, it's kind of an unknown. It's a risk. What that mix is going to do and how it's going to pan out. So you see, this is, why I've listed these things as risks and things that need to be analysed. We need another year to analyse this properly.
And I guess, well, I'll pass over to other committee members that we're short on time, but thank you very much.
Yes. Terrific. Member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Professor, for coming here today. My question is in relation to off the back of the Honourable Connie Benares, and we were talking about not a university's job to create industries, but I believe a role of the university is to create the skilled and educated workers that will work in those industries. But currently South Australia is below the national average in terms of tertiary qualifications. We also are punching under our weight in terms of a science and innovation workforce here. So how is it that the status quo is acceptable?
I'll have to take that on notice because I'll need to see the figures that you're looking at. But my information is that, there's a brain drain from South Australia. A lot of our graduates leaving and going interstate and getting jobs elsewhere. So I don't see that we're underperforming. We need to have some industries here so they stay here.
And would you argue, though, that those industries need educated and skilled workers, which is a role of a university to provide?
And we are providing them. And I think I demonstrated amply that I'm personally providing a lot.
They also need jobs too, don't they?
And you personally don't believe in the investment in additional students that this Adelaide University would provide would not be a positive?
Yes. If the merger, I first say that I have doubts that the merger would be successful. I think there's a very high risk of failure for all the reasons I gave. But if we hypothetically said that it was successful and produced more students, that would be a good thing. So certainly, many might go to other parts of Australia. They might not necessarily all stay here. We can't control them, but it's always good to have more, yes.
Oh, Reggie Martin.
Thank you. Just two quick ones, hopefully. One, I wanted to follow on from Connie Benares. Talked about the dropping of the rankings if we were to spend time looking at the merger and that transition and not focusing eye on the ball, I'll use as a paraphrase. But then you also suggested, and you said in your closing statement, that you would recommend that all three universities go away and look at the way they do things and perhaps make some innovative changes as well. How would that be any different? Like if they're transitioning to a merger or transitioning internally to be more innovative effect, isn't that going to have the same problem and drop rankings as well from what you're saying?
I said looking at alternatives to mergers, so alternatives that don't necessarily require huge structural change. Because you see, every time you have a huge structural change, there's an opportunity cost.
Yeah, but any change would have an opportunity cost. So.
Yes, but a huge structural change of a merger is a very big opportunity cost. Doing things that are suggested in the Western Australian documents that you'll see later, there are all sorts of suggestions in terms of ways of cooperating together. And those things don't necessarily have opportunity costs.
Everything has an opportunity cost, I thought.
Well, to that level at least, to that level.
So they taught me at Adelaide University of Adelaide anyway. Yeah. And just with your experience in the university sector for quite some time, I just want to come back to something that Honourable Sarah Game said about money for investment. Wouldn't a normal university budget have a line item for capital upgrades? Wouldn't there be an ongoing budget line for improvements and capital upgrades in a standard university's budget?
You would hope so.
Would,
Depends how good the management is.
but what your expectation would be that they would have planned for capital upgrades in their, even without a merger, both UniSA and the University of Adelaide should have in their budget capacity or budget for capital upgrades.
You would hope so.
And the reason why I ask is because from their report it talks about how they will use their forward estimates for capital upgrades to plan for these transitions and to improve rooms and make those capital upgrades.
Right.
Thank you.
I'll Rob Sims to close our questions for the Professor.
That's fine. Mine's been covered. So.
Very well. Thank you, Professor, for your assistance to the committee. It is appreciated.